Well, hey, before we get started with this amazing episode, please make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Well, welcome and thank you for joining another episode of Successfully Unsuccessful. I'm your host, Josh Dietrich, and today in the house we have Mr. Barry Anderberg, another fellow St. Michael, Minnesota resident. How are you, Barry?
I'm good. How you doing?
Good. Father of 3 kids. We know each other, I don't know, from what year? 2000
I'm going to say 2016.
Yeah,
Like that.
Small groups together. This is when you just switched churches, right?
Yeah, right. Shortly after moving from Maple Grove.
I always wonder when I think about church shoppers. Were you guys on a mission at that time to kind of like find something you weren't, that you had missing or that was missing from what you would find church to be?
That's a good question. So we were going to a Lutheran church in Maple Grove. You can keep talking. Okay. Yeah, we were going to church in Maple Grove, and then, like I said, we lived there for 11 years, moved to to Albertville, and continued for a while commuting every weekend back to Maple Grove for church, which wasn't that's not like that's a long commute, but yeah, I don't know. We just figured we'd look for something closer, and so we actually found a different church prior to coming to Riverside, where you and I met. And we were at that church for a while, but the guy that was preaching the day we first went to this other church, and we were like, wow, this guy's really, really solid. He, about a year after that, left to start, he got hired at a different church. So
you're like, he's gone.
And now and he was actually the assistant pastor, but he was doing a lot of the preaching, and it was a more dynamic, more engaging speaker, you know? Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, long story short, we felt like we wanted to find a different home. And this was a really small church. I mean, we're talking like 50 people in the congregation.
Oh, wow.
Real small, and in St. Michael. And went to Riverside, and we went there, and the very first time we visited, we signed up for a small group. My wife is like, boom. Yeah, we liked it right away, and liked Tom's message. And but I will say at that time, I was a relatively new Christian and not very theologically informed. And so I don't really think I knew what I was looking for. It's kind of, like you just know when you feel comfortable and when you like something, and
there's a package.
Yeah. But as far as like checking theological boxes, like if you did ask me at the time, is the church Calvinist, for example? And they're not, but like, right. I wouldn't have had any idea.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that is, but now I do. Right. And me personally, if I went to a church and they were Calvinist, that's a
deal breaker.
That's a deal breaker right there for me. Yeah.
So. Yeah. Predestination is a topic that can get people pretty riled up.
Yeah. Exactly. So, so I've learned a ton since then.
Yeah.
And so we're still at Riverside. I don't agree with Pastor Tom on everything,
Well, that's okay. Right.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it.
Right.
Well, so that's interesting. I think, but your background and growing up, were you a kid who had to go to church? Your parents go to church?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And you grew up then what denomination?
So we were Baptist. So this is in Oklahoma City.
Yep.
That's where I was born and raised. Went to a Baptist church, and very consistent every single weekend. And it seemed to me like as a kid that it was a big deal, right? Really important that we don't miss church. And then I remember very distinctly, and I can't remember what it was. I think it may have been around the time my parents separated, but then we quit going for a period of time, right? Not for a really long time. I don't remember, but I just remember thinking to myself as a kid, I very distinctly remember thinking, oh, I guess maybe this isn't as important as I thought it was.
Interesting. So they just stopped going.
Yeah.
What age were you?
It's really hard to say. I mean, maybe 9 or 10,
okay,
something like that.
So the example of kind of that, godly leadership, learning about faith in the home, like that's at an age where you probably needed it.
Yeah. Right. But I think that was a mistake my parents made, because it really sent that message to me. Like I said, like, oh, well, I thought this was super important because we do this every single weekend, and now we're not.
Right.
And it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal that we're not. And so,
did something happen? Do you think that they experienced and were just fed up?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things, right, where parents aren't really necessarily communicating those sorts of things to the kids.
Right.
So who knows? And I guess I've never really taken the time to ask and dig into that. Yeah. So,
the older generation is different. Like my father is only 21 years older than me. And, some of the things from previous churches, pastors that they said, he still has beef with, or, finds things to talk about. And, I always find that interesting. And it's, similar to many probably Christians all over the world, where an experience that we had as a child, or we saw our parents, and there's this, resentment that builds for whatever reason. And sometimes we never really know until we get a chance to ask questions and we go a little deeper, and then something pops out,
right.
about what that looks like. And so I'm familiar with that because my father often says things about previous church. So,
sure.
And that's just because his personality is that way. But,
right.
I think finding the right church and being fed and having that, music experience, that worship, and then good teaching for the kids, that whole package kind of comes with this feeling a little bit, right? It's like, oh, this is a welcoming place, but the place that we met, pretty biblically sound, and you can get fed. But what I was going to kind of go into is what I heard and knew about you is that you quickly, as you got back in as a newer believer in, late 2016, 17, whatever, went into this apologetics route of really seeking to understand how to defend the faith. Right.
Yep.
And I was like, Barry's all in on this stuff. And so you take for granted, like, cause I grew up in the church, and a lot of these things, I didn't have that passion to learn because, it's just built in.
Assumed, right?
Yeah. So I'm curious, how long were you in that? Are you still in the apologetics?
I am. I mean, I guess I wouldn't call it apologetics so much anymore as I've moved more into just philosophy, pure philosophy, right? Versus like, I guess when I think of apologetics, I think of more like, William Lane Craig or Frank Turek, or
I would have no idea what you're talking about.
Norman Geisler. I mean, yeah, if you look up Christian apologetics, I mean, they're probably like,
the top guys,
the go-to guys, right?
But are they the kind of guys? So if I were to say, what kind of stuff are they? Is it always defending the fact that there is a God over there's not, or is there layers of it?
Yeah, it's definitely layered, right? So there's that, and they're targeting different people with different questions.
Yeah.
Right. So some people, maybe if you're a complete, skeptic, maybe you need to first be convinced that God exists before you can even consider the possibility that Jesus was God or something like that. Right. So some of them, I mean, William Lane Craig will is well known for his Kalam cosmological argument, that sort of uses what we know about cosmology and the Big Bang to sort of reason that, that must be created by a timeless, immaterial God. Right. And obviously there are people that think that argument doesn't work, and there's this, back and forth debate that will never end.
Right.
And then but Craig, just again to take an example, because he's probably the most well-known Christian apologist on the planet. But he also has plenty of stuff for just the resurrection and the reliability of the Gospels and historicity of Jesus and the apostles and stuff like that. So it kind of depends where you are,
right? It does.
What your questions are.
What kind of books really help with that? Because I know one I just recently read was More Than a Carpenter. That's one
Josh
of the
McDowell.
Yeah. And what I love about that one is just the factual, angle that it plays.
Right.
A former atheist goes to college and really challenges the idea, and then for his own, sake of learning, dives deep and comes out with undeniable facts. But I'm curious how you see that role, like today, because with all the stuff happening in Israel and in the Jewish people, like we serve the same God, but we stop at this man named Jesus, and like Jesus is everything. He's the one who points us to the cross and grace and what he did.
Right.
I'm curious in your knowledge and learning this, what you say or would say as you're talking with a Jewish person, because I really personally wonder how we can't align. Because if we think about, we serve the same God, the path to the Father. I always go back to I forget who's the three L's. I won't give it away yet. The famous author.
Oh, C.S. Lewis,
Yes.
liar, lord, or lunatic.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say it, but yeah, that one. I mean, I love that argument, that this man truly did come to this earth, right? There's historical evidence across the board, undeniable.
Right.
And if you think about the layers between when it was written and published, we have far more confidence in those documents than many of the other manuscripts that exist for all sorts of other things. Right. So I'm curious though, if you were to like unwind or unpack the headbutting of a Christian and a Jewish person standing together talking about God and love, right? But then we bridge the gap on this man named Jesus because, to be honest, he's the one who showed us the example of love, right? So it's like that's the piece that, at least at a minimum, a sinless man showed us how to live. Like, why would we not want to follow that? But curious your take on that, how you would kind of use the apologetics mindset to kind of defend the facts of Jesus. I'm just curious. I'm putting you on the spot.
No, that's a good question. I mean, I guess I know Jewish people, and especially, I mean, at the time that Jesus appeared, the idea that God could become a human being is just off the table.
Yeah.
Right. And which really underscores, that something happened to these Jewish guys, teenagers, probably the disciples,
Right.
To convince them to sell their things and leave their homes. And
had they seen miracles yet? I think,
that's a great,
like
I guess.
Peter, like, hey, cast your net over this side.
Yeah.
Like, who is this man?
Yeah. Right.
So that might help.
Right. Yeah. True. But still, I mean, that's a big theological claim that, this guy is God himself.
The deity, right?
And that's when Jesus makes people angry, in the Bible, right? When John, he says, before Abraham was, I am, and they know exactly what he's saying.
Yes.
And that's a pretty controversial claim. So, so I think there's that, I mean, that's the same issue that Muslims have too, right? Like the idea that God can become a human being. Well, and they also have the Tawhid. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's their idea basically that God is a unity, right? So the whole idea of a God being a Trinity is a problem for them. But anyway, if I were talking to a Jewish person, I guess I'd really probably go to like Isaiah 53. And there's the whole suffering servant passage in Isaiah 53. I can't quote it from memory, but go pull that up. And I mean, it seems to me extremely obvious that, Jesus fits that mold.
So he's a prophet, right? And he's then writing about the future man coming to earth.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. By his stripes we're healed.
Yeah.
And, he took the iniquity of us all upon himself. And I'm possibly misquoting it, but it's a whole section, and it's very messianic. And that's probably where I would start. There's some interesting YouTube videos where there's a guy that walks around in Jerusalem talking to Jewish people and reading Isaiah 53 and asking them what they think
of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of them will say that sounds an awful like Jesus, but others will say no. I mean, I'm certain if you talk to a rabbi, they have a very different explanation, right? I think a lot of them will say that suffering servant is the nation of Israel itself, right? Which to me seems to me like a stretch, but I'm not an expert. So
yeah, but even the New Testament, just the eyewitnesses and, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And, you go through the list of scripture that has been quoted, that points people to Jesus. And it goes back to simply like, this man said all these things, and truthfully, like if he was really here, and many Jewish people believe that he was a man.
Oh yeah.
And they just don't admit that he's the Son of God, or the deity of Christ. It's like, okay, well, now we're on the same page. So if we've proved that there's a man, now we go down this, Lord, liar, lunatic, Lord,
right?
That's about all I got. But it's like, isn't it wild that we can take faith and religion and skew, from our baseline of just the pure transformation. So I think that's the shifting point of Jesus, and how following him every day and choosing to live that way is transformational. So I'm curious, in kind of coming from this many years without faith, what was your journey like getting plugged in, the path to forgiveness and reconciliation with God, and the choice to go be baptized.
Mhm.
What did all that look like for you? Because this is only now 6, 8, 7 years ago, right? 6,
Yeah.
7, 8.
Yep. Yeah. It was right around the age of 40.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say I didn't have any belief
Right.
per se. I mean, I've always believed in God.
Right.
And like I said, I was raised in a Christian home.
Yep.
I think nominally
Yep.
Christian, right? There wasn't, once you leave church on Sunday, there's not a whole lot of talk at home
Yeah.
about that, so, which I think is unfortunate. I think
is.
Christian parents should, it's not enough just to have your kids in Sunday school.
Well, the spiritual feeding, right? Like we eat our food, we prepare 3 meals a day, and maybe you fast during lunch. I tend to only have 2 meals a day too.
Yep.
But I think, Pastor Tom talks about that a lot, about becoming a spiritual self-feeding,
right,
follower, and by spiritually feeding yourself, that is the truth. And I think that is a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the day, throughout the week, and even memorizing scripture. So, can you speak to a time where that the old you has gone,
mm-hmm.
and the new you is coming? And briefly, just catching up before, you talked about a bout of some anxiety, depression.
Mm-hmm.
Was that during this time or prior to?
Prior.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is it was a key event for me. I mean, it was like, in hindsight, it was a huge blessing.
So let's go back. That's a season of life. Where were your kids? What was going on in life?
Yeah. So this is in roughly June, July of 2012.
Okay.
Right.
So 11 years ago, you have a kid that's probably 5,
right.
6, 7.
So 11 years ago would have put Graham at 7 and Owen at, gosh, it's so funny to think about that, 5.
Like
Owen would have been 5. Yep. And then Hannah wasn't born yet. Right. Yeah. So I can just sort of explain how that happened. My whole lifestyle wasn't very healthy, drinking, staying up late, screwing around on the internet, and I was playing a lot of online poker, which can keep you up at night, if you're playing longer form games.
Yeah. If you still have some cash in there.
Yeah. Right. So, overall an unhealthy lifestyle. I was still really active in the gym, but a lot of in the drinking, like I said, that was not cool. And anyway, I had just this episode one night. I'm middle of the night, I wake up, and I just instantly I'm having what I recognize now as just a panic attack. Right,
wow.
Like just.
And that was your first ever.
Yeah. Yep.
Middle of the night, even like you were dreaming, and maybe it woke you up from that.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. All I know is I woke up and I was, thoughts racing like a million miles an hour. You feel like you can't slow down, you can't stop, right?
Wow.
And so I just stood up, got out of the bed, and at the time Jenna was out of town, which I don't know if that contributed to it or not. That I was there by myself,
right.
But so I got up, put some clothes on, left the house, kids are asleep, and just went walking in the neighborhood. Because that's like all I could think to do. It's just like, I got to move. I can't just lay here and stay. So left the house, walked around for probably a good couple of hours.
No way.
Yeah. And then came back before the sun came up, came back and then that experience kind of stuck with me. Right. So I'm having sort of ongoing anxiety. Like it's enough. It's dialed back enough that I can function.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But it's still sort of free floating, where you feel like it's almost like you feel like you're not in the right skin or something. You almost feel like
separated from your body.
Yeah. Like your skin just feels
the
weird.
Out of body experience, right?
Kind of. Yeah. I mean, you're still here, but it just feels like, I don't know. It feels like everything's wrong when you try to sleep. Sleep is absolutely horrible. It does feel almost like your skin's crawling or something, right? And then that over a period of days turned into just depression, right? Food loses its flavor. Nothing's interesting anymore. You don't want to do anything, and you still have to, right? So you kind of got to drag yourself through stuff. And I remember spending time, during this period of time with my boys and thinking, like, this is like, I'm not even into this. We're trying to watch a movie together, and my mind is, somewhere else.
Just processing, dealing.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and so, thank God this period of time lasted probably about 2 weeks.
Okay.
Before I started to feel, what I would regard as normal again.
More normal.
Right. But during that time, I mean, it really caused me to evaluate my life. What am I doing with my life? Because a lot of the anxiety was sort of around like this sudden realization that I don't know why I'm getting up every day. Like I just had this realization of I don't know what's the point of life. Why am I here? Am I just here to wake up every day and go to a job? You were
navigating the purpose question.
Yeah, but I didn't. I mean, it was almost like it was forced on me.
Right. Subconsciously, but you got to that point by going, I've been doing these things because I must be numbing or doing something to avoid. Yeah. And then that realization kind of came after.
Right. Yeah. And then another part of it was a sudden recognition of my own mortality. Right. So you sort of realize like, oh yeah, and I was about 35-ish at the time. And which seems to me like an early age to start thinking about the fact that you're going to die. But that was all part of those thoughts. Right. It was like, and it was very, anxiety producing to realize like, oh yeah, I'm actually, because you spend the most of your life, especially when you're young, right? The idea that you're going to die is like so abstract.
Right.
You
never
you
don't ever think about it.
Right. And
then
then
once you go to a funeral, maybe, you're exposed to it.
Yep. And you can still forget about it right afterwards. Right. But then it becomes, at some point in your life, it becomes very, very real. And it's one of the things you have to sort of work through. So anyway, that was sort of the catalyst for me getting serious about my faith, right? Like,
so did it take you some time to kind of process that and really get to the, how do I find fulfillment? What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? Is that kind of the underlying where that kind of came from? Or how did that evolve then to you seeking truth or getting to a point where light bulb clicked that was a faith driven, him calling himself to you?
You know what? It's funny because like I said, I was 35-ish when all that happened. But I didn't become what I would consider to be a believing Christian until I was 40. So there's a 5-year gap
journey
there,
right?
And it's just thinking about that kind of stuff.
And your wife Jenna, though, she grew up in the faith, but you guys weren't currently actively going to church.
No, we were.
You were?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we were going to that church in Maple Grove.
Okay, gotcha.
Right? But it was more like, my attitude at the time
checking the box,
been,
showing up.
Yes, and a lot of it was, I believe this is good and important for kids.
I see. Because you had kids, right? And
you should go to church.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I believe any of this stuff, but we should still go to church.
At least it'll, be some guardrails.
Right. It's not going to hurt anything. Yeah. That kind of thing. So, but yeah, so that whole bout of anxiety and depression, which is something I wouldn't wish on anybody, right? Like anybody who's gone through that, it's just the absolute worst. I mean, it just feels like the whole bottom of your life has dropped out, and
you couldn't really put your finger on it.
No,
I mean, that's the hard part about it, right? Because it's like you couldn't even necessarily point to some tragic event.
No, right. That's the funny thing is I had a great job. Yeah. I was making plenty of money. I had my, good relationship with my wife, good relationship. I mean, there's literally nothing wrong.
So then in my life. How do you process that now? Like looking back and saying, how was I there? And why did it happen that way? Like, do you ever look back and say there's a wake up call there, or? Oh,
that's what it was.
That's what it was. It literally woke you up in the night.
Absolutely. I mean, it was an existential wake up call to like, okay, it's time to like think about why do you exist? Why do you get up every day? What's the point?
Yeah.
Is it just to go to a job and make a bunch of money and then, and
it seems like that
buy some stuff and acquire some things and like, a lot of people realize there's got to be more than that.
There's got to be.
Because if there's not, that's depressing. Right. If there's nothing more than that. So so that was a big wake up call for me and started me down that path of thinking more deeply about things. But, the the drinking and stuff like that, still continued, I'd cut back on it. I mean, initially when this all happened, I cut out everything. I stopped the alcohol. I stopped coffee. Like I didn't want any stimulants in my system. I didn't want anything. Right. And I'm having like chamomile tea at night, to relax and doing all these things. But eventually the habits, unless you have a more deeply rooted reason for why you're not going to do something, once you start to feel better, like, oh yeah, let's have a beer, and then those things start to come back. And then, and then around the age of 40, I finally kind of got sick of constantly struggling with
Yeah.
addiction and addictive behaviors and stuff like that. And
So was it enough's enough? What did that look like for you? It was a building then?
that was another nighttime
It was
event. Yeah. But it wasn't
the panic attack thing.
No,
Yeah.
no, this was waking up
Yeah.
in the middle of the night, I wouldn't say hungover, but I'd been drinking again, and I was just hating myself. Right. Cause I've tried to stop this stuff so many times, and I'm just like, and you get to a point with any addictive behavior where I think, if you're a thinking person, you start to feel like you're trapped. Right. Like there's no way out of this.
Yeah.
Right. And I've tried, and I'm now and that's a scary feeling too, to feel like you're trapped by something, right? Like this thing has control of you and
foothold. Yeah.
So it was another nighttime thing where I just woke up and I was hating myself and realizing I'd done it again, when I don't want to be doing this kind of stuff. And so I prayed, and and again, it was one of those things like, Jesus, I don't know if you can hear me at all, but if you can, I give up.
Sometimes we get there.
Yeah. I don't want this anymore. And so, fell back to sleep, said my prayer, fell back to sleep, woke up, and a couple of days went by where I didn't really think about, I didn't even remember that I'd prayed like that. Right. Yeah. And then I noticed, behaviors that I'd been struggling with, started to lose just a little bit, but I noticed that the desire was not quite as strong. And, that just grew from there. Those desires got less and less and less over a period of weeks and months. And the next thing I know, I was able to stop, the drinking and other things, things that men struggle with. Right. And so it's just continued.
Amen.
From there.
That's so cool. And I think what you're saying here is really the power of the name of Jesus.
Right.
Yeah. And I think in fairy tales, it kind of fits that often, right? When people don't understand or maybe know and have experienced the transformational power of Jesus, like I can speak to the same thing, not in the same ways, but my desires for things of the world, right? And it's an ongoing, like we're saved from the past, but we're working out our faith.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so the desires of this world, to even watch some of the movies, the simple action movies, this Black Adam movie, and I'm seeing The Rock throwing a guy around against the wall,
right.
And like he's nothing. And yeah, it's a movie, it's fiction, but that wasn't even that long ago. But like those types of things, the music you listen to, and this is a hard one because I'm a drummer, right? And I love lots of my music, but got to a point where I would rather praise and worship than not know the lyrics and wonder, because I woke up one morning singing a lyric to a song and it was not a healthy lyric. And then like, oh my gosh, this has been, in my head.
Right.
But I'm a stubborn kid. So as I'm growing up, anything that was told not to do is like, well, of course I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, totally.
But the idea of music, junk in, garbage out, I experienced it real hand. But as you continue to be conformed to him, you make room for him, and it starts pushing some of this stuff out.
Right.
So crazy. So did you begin little small steps? Like, so that period of 35 to 40 was kind of like that second wake up call, Jesus, I don't want to do this anymore. But then it felt like almost supernaturally kind of just dissipated some of those other things.
Right. Those desires lessened.
And then when did you lean into, proactively feeding yourself, to seek truth and rise out of that season?
I mean, I think part of that included Bible reading, right? So I started like a Bible in a year or something like that. Or it might have been just the New Testament initially, right? Reading the Old Testament that can be difficult.
Especially when you get into like numbers.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, no, I started reading the Bible, and I mean, and now I think I've completed the Bible in a year like 10 times.
Oh my gosh.
So, and that's huge, right? I mean, that when you're putting God's word into your mind on a daily basis, I mean, that's a huge part of it, and I wish part of me, as you ask me these questions, makes me wish I'd have kept a journal or something of daily events, because the
Do you keep one
timeline
now,
is,
by the way?
we do. My wife and I both got 5-year journals,
Oh, yeah.
so it's got a little entry for each
Yep.
day.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, those are good.
There's a gratitude section in there.
I mean, you could, it's just open-ended, whatever,
Okay.
right? Sometimes I feel like it's like Captain's log, right? Like today, this happened, this happened, this happened, right? I don't have anything super insightful to say. But yeah, so the journal, but I didn't obviously do that back then because I think we're in year 3 right now.
Oh, wow.
Or maybe year 4. Anyway. Yeah. So Bible reading and then prayer, obviously, I started making a point to wake up in the morning and go downstairs before everybody else is up and have prayer time and just doing all the things that you think you're supposed to do, right? Reading scripture and being dedicated about prayer and making sure that you've got a church home and hearing the word. And then, one thing that's really great about the day and age that we live in is podcasts, right? Like this, because what I would do, in those first few years, man, it's like I couldn't, once the lights go on, like you can't get enough.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was listening to sermons, I'd go to church, but then I was listening to sermons during the week. And I'm listening, Tim Keller was one of my absolute favorites. I mean, I'd listen to
just feeding your brain.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'd go on a run and I'd listen to a sermon while I'm on a run.
You're on fire.
Yeah. And that was that's all. It's all kind of synergistic. It all kind of works together.
And continuing to be renewed in that way is amazing. But like, when do you think the foothold of the drinking and the other stuff sort of broke off? And did you have to? What did that look like from that journey? Or is it a place where now you just recognize that there's a zero tolerance? Or I'm just curious because men, I think, can relate to this. Like many times we have that one or two secretive things we hide and, very, very much so not willing and able. And there's really not forums to go talk about your sin. And so if you're not being asked, if you're not being challenged, and if your wife doesn't know that this is a struggle, you kind of allow yourself to live in secrecy a little bit, right?
Right. Well, that's one of the things that I think that as Protestants we're lacking is we don't have formal confession, right? And I think that if that's something you can take advantage of, where you can go to a priest or someone like that in a confidential setting and talk about those things. Yeah, I think that's important.
Well, so community in general.
Yeah, right. I mean, otherwise you need to feel comfortable talking to, a brother, probably a brother in Christ, right? I don't know some of those things you're going to want to talk about with a female, but
and is that really appropriate, right? And I've had to, my wife and I have set some guardrails around that, and even just the types of things that we have to be aware of in the way we speak, the way we talk, what we watch. It is one of those deals where if you're not moving forward in him,
right,
you are very, very loudly moving backwards. I feel like, because the flesh, the things of this world can be so appealing.
Right. I mean, for me, my experience has been that I mean, the alcohol is no longer a thing. Yeah. Like it's
squashed. So that's something interest. You just no interest to even have a beer.
No. Now that's only since, say, this is the timeline, right? That's only since July.
Okay.
Right.
Well, and I get that,
but if I were to plot it out on a graph, right, the frequency used to be like way up here, and over time, it gets less and less and less, right? And then it's like long periods of time where there's no indiscretion, right? And then you'll have a slip,
a flare up,
right? And usually it'll be maybe one instance, right? And then you have to. Sometimes you can really beat yourself up about that kind of stuff, but you have to step back and like see the progress that you've made.
You forget about it. And sometimes you put all the weight on that one screw up.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's never going to go away. I mean, there is the flesh and that power, in the name of Jesus, absolutely can be gone and delivered from it, but the temptation.
Right.
Well,
that's the thing with some of these things are built into our biology, right? Now our biology is not such that we need to drink alcohol, but we are sexual beings, and that's inescapable. Right. So you, as a man, and especially, I mean, men are visual.
Yes.
And we live in such a culture that is just
instant gratification. Find it now.
Well, and it's saturated with sexual imagery, right?
Oh, man.
Like, I mean, you watch the Super Bowl or the ads or like, movies or wherever you turn. I mean, there's things that are, as a guy, they're trying to get you, to look and to hold the look and
the whatever. Lord of the entertainment world.
Yeah. I mean, so those things, I mean, I kind of accepted, like, short of becoming a full saint or something, right? And you're always going to have temptations.
Yep.
Now you can control your exposure,
right?
I mean, we have the choice of what we're watching and allowing to go into our minds, right? That's kind of the advantage of some of those saintly guys who've gone into monasteries,
yes,
or wherever, because they're completely cut off from all that stuff.
Yes,
and in a certain sense,
attached to the world.
Yeah, they're not getting that kind of temptation. But you know what? Even short of that, your own mind, right, can still conjure up imagery.
Totally.
So you're battling that, and so it's always going to be a fight.
As you're describing this journey, and every man, every human is facing this, but what do you find is the thing that allows you to continue to stay grounded? Something you say, something you do, some routines you have, some guardrails you have in place that, because I think the things you do for yourself, we're reminding ourselves that we are broken beings and it's very easy to fall into temptation, but like zero tolerance for alcohol, that's one thing. That's also a desire thing, but I haven't been a guy who struggles with porn, so that hasn't been my thing. But my thing has been, anger, and then, addiction. So I was tobacco for years and years and years and years and years. And then I had it cold turkey. And the good news is that you kind of get past that, the foothold is gone. But, setting up guardrails and having good routine. And I know it's the slow fades, in our marriage, it's the slow fades in our faith that we get off course by that 1 degree gradually over time. And now we're this far away.
Yeah.
So what have you kind of put in place from a daily routine standpoint, to kind of stay up?
Right. Well, one of the things I have come to realize is that, we're spiritual beings, but we're also biological, physical, embodied creatures, right? So a lot of these problems or a lot of these behaviors are rooted in biology, right? And so
some DNA,
but also neurochemistry, right? So I've been Andrew Huberman.
Yes, Huberman Labs.
Yeah. So I've been watching a lot of his content. And he talks a lot about dopamine and the impact and the power of this reward center in the brain, right? And a lot of these behaviors, whether it's the porn or the alcohol or the tobacco or whatever,
just looking for that
dopamine hit, right? So finding ways to reset your brain, right? Because some people, a lot of people, they're I mean, the more stimulating activity you do, right, the less sensitive your brain is, and then the more you need, right? So
the more you need,
right?
It's so, like if you stop eating candy and then you just eat fruit, and you're like, "This is amazing,"
right?
And all of a sudden you have candy, you're like, "Oh, I don't need to go back to this other stuff,"
right? So there's that whole idea of like if you look up like dopamine. I don't know if it's a reset or refresh or whatever, but changes in lifestyle to sort of reset your brain, right? So I mean. And all sorts of stuff stimulates our brains, right? Scrolling on your phone, right? Every time you hit that piece of content that's really interesting for you, that's a little hit in your brain, right? And of course, the people that make these apps design it that way, right? Just like if you're in the casino, every time you pull the lever. And so there's stuff like that. There's, really any kind of stimulating activity, food, the candy, all that kind of stuff. So to the extent that you can cut those things out of your life, I mean, I got all the social media stuff off my phone. Yeah. So it's just not a distraction. I do have YouTube, and I do get sucked into YouTube Shorts.
You can. Yep.
A little more often than I like. And I'm thinking I love the YouTube because I love the podcasts, and that's mainly why I keep it on my phone. But I think I need to just go to a straight audio podcast.
Well, and I've even seen people downgrade their phones for this reason.
Yep.
You know, and it's crazy the world we live in, because I think some would call that crazy. You know, some would call that crazy that you don't have enough willpower, you know, and there's that fine line, because we all know our weaknesses.
Yeah.
But I think my belief system is that more people should consider how they can truly break those cycles through their own discipline.
Right.
You know, and part of that is, how do we allow ourselves to say it's a tool and keep it, but only use it in this time, right? So there's that layer of, okay, cold turkey, it's gone. Well, I couldn't do, you know, a little bit of this here and there with tobacco.
Right.
So maybe that's the same with social media, or is there another way around it? Because I struggle with that one. I can get sucked right in, and in my world, like it's heavily around content.
Yep. Some people I think are naturally able to have a balance. I'm not. I mean, I'm all or nothing.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, so when I was drinking, I would, you know, I don't drink socially. I mean, I will.
Right.
But, you know, I'm happy to drink completely by myself and have, you know, and the point is not to just have a beer. The point is to have the six pack, you know, and to really get going. And, you know, so that's how I've always been with everything. It's so I have to make those clean breaks. But as far as like, you know, the neurochemistry and all that stuff, resensitizing your brain to stimulating activities, right? One, you're going to find life in general is just more interesting,
more fulfilling, right? And interesting. Yeah.
You feel better, you know, because it takes less to trigger that part of the brain that's giving you the reward or the feedback or whatever of pleasure. And then another thing that I saw a year ago, so Huberman's big on cold exposure, right?
Just being done.
Is that cold exposure, like cold showers?
Oh, okay.
And cold plunging, ice baths.
I'm definitely, there's a couple of gurus out there that preach that.
Yes, it's probably, I would call it trendy at this point.
Is it?
Yeah. But about last January, I started just every morning taking a cold shower.
Still do.
Right? So I got a ice bath for Christmas.
An actual separate.
Yes. Yep.
Does it stay cold throughout the day? Or?
Well, it's on the back porch. So here in Minnesota,
so it's cold.
It's cold. Yeah. In fact, I had to get a little heater for like animal water, like horses.
Yeah.
And you put it down in there.
Gotcha.
So it'll keep the water at about 45 degrees.
So it's perfect for this weather then.
Yes, exactly. When we get to warm weather, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Right. It'll probably heat it up to a.
Right. And there are things, I mean, obviously you can throw a bunch of ice in there, but I don't know. But
so
anyway.
What are you doing? Is that daily?
Yeah. Every morning.
You do? For how long?
3 minutes.
And what do you find during that time? Obviously, it's a very long 3 minutes, kind of like we were talking about with working out.
Yeah.
But are you meditating? Are you praying? Are you thinking through what is your mind doing at that time, and what is the purpose of it for? Because I think it's really about that mind-body connection, right? And it's about mind over matter in some ways,
right? Well, it's so physically stimulating that it almost clears your mind completely. You're so completely focused on the physical sensation, right? That there's just, and in a way, it's almost like a 3 minutes of meditation where you've reached that Zen moment, right? Where you have, because that's kind of the point of some meditation forms, right? Is to eliminate the thoughts, right? And that to me is what it is a lot similar to. Wow. Is 3 minutes of just, I mean, you're so centered on how your body feels.
There's not room for anything else.
No, you're not really thinking.
I feel that way sometimes when I'm riding my Peloton, when I'm really pushing it, and I'm working hard, because I have my phone here and I have the ability to put a laptop up, and sometimes I'm just like, oh, I want to get some, check on this or that. And I'm like, you know what? Right here is about all I can handle. Right, I keep pedaling. Yeah, I see what you mean.
But so cold. I did cold showers for a year.
Okay, and
I started doing where I'd get in, and this was absolutely miserable. But you get in to a cold shower, just full stop, out of bed. Ooh. And it's no. And then I switched to take a hot shower, and then at the end, I put it all the way to cold. 3 minutes.
So that I can do, because that's like you can at least wind it down.
Yeah. I mean, I do suddenly.
You do just boom.
Yep. And then, but at least you got the hot shower, right?
Yeah, I know.
But and the science on this stuff is really fascinating. And Huberman talks a lot about it. And he's had some people on that's all they do is like research, the body's response to being in cold. But to get back to the point of dopamine, right. That they have observed, like a 2.5 times increase in your dopamine
overall, or for that moment.
So other things can increase your dopamine, obviously sex, drugs, things like that. But when they observe the dopamine increase, it's a sudden spike, and then it goes down very quickly, right? And which is kind of the problem with drug use in general, right?
Right.
Aside from all
quick
the
hit,
health,
quick hit,
right? You get the quick hit, and then you want more.
But ice baths,
what they've observed with ice baths is a 2.5 times increase in dopamine, but then it's sustained throughout the day, and it gradually comes back down.
No way.
Yep. So, to me, my 3 things are ice bath in the morning, coffee, just one, and then fasting.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't eat until probably 1.
Okay. So in the morning, so you don't, then what about lunch then? You mentioned, I thought that was the one you skipped.
Well, I just have a late.
Okay.
I
see. Late breakfast.
When I get back from the gym, I'll grab something and then just eat at the desk while I'm working. Right.
Yeah.
So, but those 3 things, I mean, if you want mental clarity, and focus and concentration and energy throughout the day, I mean, it's
wow.
I recommend
That's
it.
powerful.
Yeah.
Well, don't have a ton of time. I want to shift gears briefly and thinking about just your journey from 35 to 40 and some, as you have 3 kids, and more intentional about raising them in a home where Christ is the center. It's sometimes easier said than done as a father of 5, right?
Yep.
And your own transformation and journey. But as you've kind of gone through this, how has that encouraged you or motivated you or pushed you, to step up, the leadership in your home as a father or even as a husband? How has that changed? Right. So you're this guy who found, his pleasure in the world, and like many of us, and at a later age with kids already.
Right.
But then saying, hey, I'm all in on this thing.
Right.
And then how does that, change how you parent and manage your kids over time? I'm just curious because now we're going back 10 years. No, 7, 8 years to 4. Yeah.
Yeah. To 40. Right.
Yep. And, so you've had some years to practice.
Right.
What for you, how does that look? And how could that look? How should that look? And the motivation behind it.
Right. Well, I'll tell you one thing that will always be a regret for me is that I didn't start following Jesus sooner. Right.
Hey, man, I think, but there's lessons learned that go back to all of those things that I still believe if hadn't happened, hadn't given you the frame of reference, and maybe even particularly hadn't influenced your 35 and 40-year-old wake up calls.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, and it's very possible that I mean, you can always second guess your whole entire life, right? Like if I'd have
done this,
become a Christian in college, then I very well could live somewhere else.
It would look very different.
Who knows? So I'm here and I love my life, and I'm very blessed and happy to be where I'm at. But as far as parenting, I guess my point in saying that I wish I would have started following sooner was that I think when you can talk to your kids about Jesus and about what God has done for them and about the concept of sin and helping them to recognize their own sin, and their need for help. Yep. Right. And introducing them to the Bible in general, the characters of the Bible, the stories of the Bible from an early age. I mean, again, we went to church, they went to, the kids' church or whatever. Right. I don't, again, to what I said earlier, I don't think that's enough, right? Like nobody
one time a week on a Sunday for this long,
right, is not going to cut it, right? So during those years when I hadn't become a follower of Jesus yet, I mean, we didn't really pray at a meal. There wasn't really conversations in the home that were biblical or anything like that.
You didn't have a Sabbath? Do you still do a Sabbath?
We did that for a little while.
For a Friday, right?
Yeah.
It was a Friday.
It started Friday evenings.
Yeah.
Like the Jewish people do, right? And then we'd do like a screen fast, basically, just like turn off all the crap for a day. We did that for a summer, and I really liked it, but it's hard to sustain, right? especially if you want to include the not working.
Yeah.
Because then you're talking about, hey, I need my wife not to do any laundry, or,
It is hard.
no grocery shopping.
Yes.
And, how serious do you want to take it?
Right.
But anyway, I think there were a lot of missed opportunities. And so, and a lot of decisions that I would have made differently in terms of the kind of media that I allowed the kids to be exposed to. Right. Or screens in the house, things like that, things that, a spiritually informed parent may have made, different choices. Right. So, and now I'm seeing some of the fruits of those things. Right. I mean, I wouldn't call either of my sons right now believers. They don't reject it. They're not like opposed to it. Graham's got a picture of Steph Curry on his wall that's got a quote from him talking about, God and how much God's done for his life. Yeah. So they're by no means hostile to it, but I wouldn't say, and I'm personally okay with this because I don't think there's any.
They need to work theirs out too.
They need to work theirs out, and I don't think there's a rush to get kids to say yes to Jesus when they don't really know what they're
saying yes to. And but I think, to your point, there's probably enough there to give them that foundation. But I think, until you really realize what you're really up against, and where it all hangs on the line in those in the middle of the night moments. Mm-hmm. Foundation is happening, right? And Scripture talks about raising your kids in the way they should go, so when they're old, they'll come back to, or they won't fall from. And you know what? Just getting started. Because you said something about something that I even I should have probably been more strict on, the games or their screen time, and I'm kind of a screen time. Police. Like they call me the hacker because I hack their Wi-Fi.
That's what they call it. Yeah. Right.
But still could be done.
Yeah. But I will say once I became a Christian and began to take my spiritual life more seriously, then it was in my mind time to play catch up with the kids. Right. So we would do what I called our men's meeting. So every Wednesday night, the boys and I would sit downstairs, and I went through a variety of different books with them. So we'd read a chapter, and something spiritually based. And then sometimes for entertainment, we'd watch, I don't know if you're familiar with the Bible Project.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Love that.
Yeah. So we'd watch a Bible Project video to give them, an intro to one of the Gospels or some high level overview of the Trinity or whatever. So just some theological and spiritual formation, pray together.
Good for you, man. Like that's so good. Yeah. When did that start?
Almost right after, right? So,
and then those are things that come and go as seasons, right? And
well, we don't do the men's meeting anymore. Yeah, it's hard to get an 18 and a 16-year-old to come downstairs and sit down with you, and you're gonna get. You get so much pushback. It's like, man, I'm not gonna force you guys, but I will tell you one thing. You get the kid to the comment I made earlier about podcast sermons, stuff like that. You get a captive audience and turn on something that will spiritually inform, right? So if I've got one of them in the car for, any substantial
you're going to kind of plant that seed on.
Yeah, I'll turn on some. In fact, a couple weeks ago, Owen and I were taking a drive, and I put on a Tim Keller sermon.
Suddenly in the background.
Yeah. And he's like, can't we listen to something more interesting? I'm like, yeah, we can next time. I don't want to make this a thing where every single time you're in the car, I'm going to be trying to
pump your ears full of.
Right. Because I do listen to, like I said, a lot of other things that are science or philosophy, or whatever, which he finds interesting. But and of course now we're at that age too, where, hey, let's go to church this morning. Come on, guys, get up. Good luck getting an 18 and a 16-year-old out of bed on Sunday morning to go to church, right? And so these days, it's been a while now that I've had either of the boys in church, which I feel like I'm failing. But at the same time, how much of a war do you want to go into on a Sunday morning to try and force people out of bed?
It can go a number of different ways, right? Because I think I grew up in the era where my parents really, really were hard or worked hard to enforce certain things that almost pushed me away and encouraged me to disobey or do whatever I wanted to do. And my wife, on the other hand, didn't have that, but she grew up in faith. Mm-hmm. And so the difference was the relationship was left intact on her end, and mine suffered.
Right.
And so they're still talking every day, her parents. And so I recently, in March last year, a year ago, started counseling with my mom just to unpack some things. And the power of, like you said, just being able to, in a room with others, facilitating conversation and exchange of emotions was like, all I had to do is get down to the bottom of, I don't know why I feel this way, but these are the things I can recall. And full circle, after 5 sessions, it was really just about me not really feeling loved, as opposed to just being the kid that was strong-willed and hard. I was like, I loved you. I'm like, yeah, I knew that. I never didn't.
You knew it. You didn't feel it, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't that I never didn't feel loved. I just never felt like you expressed it in that,
Right.
We never grew that bond because of that. So clean slate, man. Right. So you can always get started. But I think that's the important thing with any relationship. There's always today, as long as we have today, and being present. That's one of the hardest things. So even for you to be right here, think about that 1 hour, just being present, having conversation. Sometimes it's, with a kid with a device, it's almost impossible.
Right. Well, and that's another reason for parents to get the social media off of their own phones,
of their own stuff, right?
I mean, how often do you see parents with their
Totally.
nose in their phone, and like you're at a kid's sporting event and half the parents got their head down. And
I'm so guilty of that.
Yeah. Oh, I have been too, absolutely. But I just had to get that crap off my phone.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, my kid's out there right now. Camera, I'm recording. All right, he's not out there. Pause. He's checking some.
Right.
I'm like, oh gosh, that's just. But no, long ways. And I think at the end of the day, if the heart is around growth mindset, and moving towards him, they will go through their own journey. And hopefully, as you continue to walk with them and guide them and lead them, and, you have a relationship with them that encourages them to want to come back and seek you for those hard times. But also they know that they can always go to their own father, and I never really considered that much around the role of a son is to please the father, and our own, worldly human father was our model, and how broken we are, that if we look at our heavenly father and the love that comes from that, we sometimes think we feel that way towards God about our own father. 'Cause it's like, oh, I did something wrong. I don't want my father to be ashamed or upset with me. And so I'm not going to go to him and let him know this. So I'm going to stew on it.
Right.
And this is the same thing we do. Right. So, those little practices in your own life and moving those distractions that can be retaught, so powerful. But thanks for sharing. 'Cause I know, often it's not very easy to go out publicly and talk about struggles. And I like to remind others that Paul and James both do a good job talking about their struggles, and it requires us to rely upon Christ.
Right.
So,
well, I know there are a lot of guys out there that, struggle with the same stuff and feel like you got to keep it to yourself. And so I think the more that people can open up and feel comfortable being vulnerable, the better.
Having community of guys that get it too. Like there's no judgment here. In fact, I still continue to talk about my stuff because I feel like it invites that vulnerability, invites others to go, oh, he's got stuff. I can trust him.
Right.
So no, it's good. And that's part of the reason I started my Stewardpreneur Core Council, which is really about equipping men around the belief system, but also how to put it into action and apply it, and then having the ability to bring these things to a group and get wise counsel and solve life's challenges in a way that's healthy, not speculating what the solution might be. It's like, what would your wife say? You're like, oh, I didn't really consider even what she would think about this. Let's start there.
Yeah.
So good, Barry. So good. Thanks for making it to the house, the drive across town.
Sure.
Love to keep it going, but it's game time. But hey, thanks so much for joining in. Barry Anderberg, joining me here in St. Michael, Successfully Unsuccessful podcast. See you next time.